Literally my first education class that I had my freshman year, the professor said to the entire class, "Not sure why anybody would want to be a teacher." And I ended up dropping the education major.
In this episode of the Humans of Multifamily podcast, we're sharing Jennifer's experiences.
I didn't want the other way when you asked what would I regret if I didn't take that job, if it was, offered to me and I turned it down. I didn't want 5 years from now to look back and say, man, I should have done that.
You don't really know what's in your best interest, and all you have to do is just kind of appreciate that moment and remember that nothing's as good as it seems and nothing's as bad as it seems.
That's right. But you have to have the belief in yourself, and you also have to have a really strong network of people that are there to bend over backwards to help you succeed. And that when you look back a year, 2 years, 4 years, you'll actually appreciate that obstacle that you overcame. Why can't I do this? And if I don't know the answers, which there are so many times I was out of my comfort zone, but I know a lot of people that are gonna.
Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to chat. It's a long time coming.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can just start with an intro about you.
Sure, absolutely. So Jennifer Stachokas, based in Phoenix, Arizona, and I am president of Western Wealth Communities and the VP of People and Technology for Western Wealth Capital, which is the parent investment company of the management company.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, I know you've done plenty of podcast interviews over the years. My hope for today is to do something a little bit different and some time talking about who Jennifer is outside of Western Wealth and how did you get here? I know you studied French and international commerce and somehow ended up in multifamily. So I'd love to kind of hear who Jennifer is outside of multifamily. So maybe we can start with what was your childhood like?
Absolutely. So I grew up in central Pennsylvania, so in a small town, didn't have school buses to get to school. It was right outside of Harrisburg, which is the capital, but it was this tiny little town that really was kind of euphoria. And you could walk or bike ride to see your friends. I walked or rode my bike to school. And it just provided a really nice education and a good surrounding to grow up. I wouldn't necessarily want to move back there, right? Sometimes when you grow up there, it's good to leave. But it was a great place to grow up. And as I was growing up, I was really passionate. I found out probably in middle school that I was really passionate about foreign language and anything to do with France and the French language. And I thought at that point that I was going to be a French teacher. And probably because I was so influenced by the teacher, my French teacher growing up. Her name was Mrs. Ahrens, and she was just a really impactful teacher and instilled in me how important it was to learn a foreign language to become better at English, the English language. And so I felt like I relearned how to speak and how to write in English once I learned a foreign language. So thought my life was going to be a teacher, started in college and was a dual major in education and French. And literally my first education class that I had my freshman year, the professor said to the entire class, "Not sure why anybody would want to be a teacher." Which is pretty crazy. Yeah. And I ended up dropping the education major. I decided, you know what, I'm going to just chart my path. And even though my parents probably thought it was crazy to be a French major in college, what are you going to do with that? Is the question. But I do think those liberal art backgrounds actually provide you a lot of good information, a really good baseline to be successful in a lot of different paths in your life. And so it's something that I certainly don't regret. When you're a foreign language major, you have to take a second language as well. And I had taken a second language all through high school, I guess middle school and into high school. And so I also took German, so French and German. But I was really most passionate about France and anything to do with the French language. So completed that degree, and then I thought, you know what? I'd always wanted to live in Washington, D.C. So as a child, when you grow up in Harrisburg, we had so much access to get to New York City, to Baltimore, to Philadelphia, and to Washington, D.C., that field trips were amazing in the school that I went to. We got to go to art museums, we got to go to Broadway shows. I'm just exposed to so much culture that was surrounding the area. And I knew that my heart was in Washington, D.C. at the time, and knew it was anything I could do to get there would be great. And ended up my senior year, I interned at a group called it was through the Washington Center. And they connect you with embassies, with business, anything to connect you into an internship for your last year or your last semester. And I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to interview at the French and the Canadian embassy, with Voice of America. And then this tiny little international business company called Advance International. And it was a gentleman who was from France, and he'd hired people from all over the world to work for him. And we did a lot of consulting work. And I was fortunate to kind of sit next to him and do a lot of translation for him, and do some linguistics work. So knew that my passion was still there, and knew after college that I wanted to pursue a graduate degree, but I had to find a way to pay for it. Right.
Yeah.
So wanted to stay in DC and took a job at a pharmaceutical consulting firm as a research assistant, which sounds really great, but it was literally driving up to the National Institute of Health and going through their archives, looking for articles to back up research that some of the pharmacologists were working on. And I knew that was not my passion, but it certainly allowed me to save money and put something away so I could go to graduate school.
Yeah.
And then ended up going to George Mason in international commerce and policy. And I guess I should step back. Actually, when I was in undergrad, I had the opportunity to live overseas for a year.
Wow.
So when you're a foreign
Where did you
language
live?
major in France.
Oh, in France. Okay.
When you're a foreign language major, pretty much to be able to get a degree in the language, you have to live overseas and you have to immerse yourself in the culture. And so lived in a town on the Mediterranean called Montpellier and had an absolutely magical experience. Growing up, I always thought I wanted to live in Paris, right? It's what you see in the movies and TV shows. And I was a bit disappointed that my school had the exchange in southern France, but only to realize it was the best thing that could have possibly happened. So I got to go to Paris probably a dozen times during that year, and that was enough. And just being somewhere near the beach and in a really vibrant town that had beautiful weather with a lot of culture, it was a really great experience.
That's incredible. Yeah. What were your parents like? What were they like?
So super supportive. And some of my friends, as I was growing up, used to jokingly say, many people listening may not know this show, but there was a show called Leave It to Beaver. I think it was a 1960s show. And my family was very much like that, right? We always had dinner together. We sat at the table and we talked and downloaded about the day. So I've always been very close to my family because of that. So they instilled in me the importance of giving back to other people. And so volunteering, giving back to people is something that's always been very important to me throughout my entire career. And that was from the upbringing that my parents instilled in me. And it's so important that, when you make money, that you also need to give it, you need to pay it forward to other people that are less fortunate and help them as well.
Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have an older brother who is 5 years older. And it was funny because the 5-year age difference, actually we were quite close. And he was very protective of me growing up. I think there's something between an older brother and a younger sister. So he was very protective of me. But at the same time, my high school years, it was like I was an only child because he was off at college and kind of had the run of the house to myself, which was nice.
That's funny. That's awesome. So growing up, what would you say most shaped you to be the person you are? Did you have a specific life event or life events that you feel like were super impactful?
I would say, studying abroad, certainly.
Yeah.
So studying abroad in undergrad, and then I also had the opportunity to spend a summer in graduate school in England. And that just teaches you, so much responsibility, discipline, how to budget money, how to truly be responsible for yourself. And so when people say, why would you get an English degree or a foreign language degree? When you have the opportunity to live abroad, you grow up really quick because I had a credit card, I guess, for the first time in my life. At that point, this was a long time ago, almost 30 years ago that I studied abroad the first time. And you're responsible, right? I lived in the dorms, but I still had to pay rent on a monthly basis. It wasn't like it was in the States where you pay for the semester and your parents just send a check in. and it's all taken care of. So I needed to budget appropriately and make sure that I could make my rent payment and still, provide food through the food plan and still have fun, right? And go out and do things. And my parents were nice enough to buy me train passes so I could go and explore. And so I was constantly on the go, either through university-sponsored programs where they'd take you out on a bus, or I would use my train pass and just go and explore and see things in a different way. And through that study abroad program, you meet so many different people from around the world, too, that are also studying abroad. They just happen to be at the same university. And so, I hung out with people from Greece and from France and from Germany and from all over the world. And so you learn to respect and understand different cultures and have sensitivity to that as well.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I actually, not many people know this, but I grew up in the Bay Area. And when I was 12, I actually moved to India and went to an international school there from 12 to 18. And very similar to you, I mean, it was a little bit longer than studying abroad, but my school had a bunch of different cultures. And I think people ask me, what do you feel like you learned the most, or what did you take away from? I think it's just the ability to be super adapting and adaptable, just like all the different cultures and all that. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that.
Absolutely. And when you live in France, they go on strike. Everything goes on strike at some point in time, right? The postal service goes on strike. The bus service goes on strike, and you just have to roll with the punches that, hey, I was supposed to go to Prague one weekend on the train, but the train was on strike, so I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to do something else and experience life. And I just remember sitting on the trains and the buses every time I would go somewhere and just feeling like I wish somebody could pinch me because it doesn't seem real, right? That so many people don't leave the city that they grew up in, or they don't leave the state that they grew up in, and they're missing out on so much culture and so much to take in around the world. Totally.
I, living in LA and California and India all my life, sometimes I forget, when you live in a city like LA or the Bay Area, you forget how, desirable it is to, like, when you're in the city, you don't realize how lucky you are. But when you start seeing, people who visit and they're like, wow, you live in LA, that's crazy. You tend to appreciate the city you're in so much more.
That's the truth.
So I guess jumping a little bit forward, what has your journey been like from your first job in multifamily? I think one thing that I find so fascinating and appreciate about this industry is that you have so many cases where people start as a leasing agent or a regional manager and basically just rise through the ranks. And when you look at traditional tech, which is where I'm from, there's not that loyalty anymore to the industry or companies, right? People jump around and things like that. So I'm just so curious about that journey and what that was like.
Sure. Like many people in the industry, I fell into the industry.
Yeah.
It was a convenience job, quite honestly. So I was going back to graduate school. I was working as a research assistant, and I knew that Monday through Friday job, 8 to 5, wasn't going to work. Even though it was night school, I knew I was going to need some time during the week to be able to focus on my studies. And the apartment building that I lived in, I was on the elevator and it said looking for fun, enthusiastic people that want to save money on their rent. And I thought, and I had met I think she was the assistant manager at the time. I had met her before. And so I went into the office and said, well, what exactly are you looking for? And it was for a leasing professional job. And I explained to her that I was going back to graduate school, but it was mostly during the evening. And it sounded perfect, right? Because I could work 5 days a week, but it was every other weekend. And I always had a day off during the week. And so it allowed me to have time to work on my studies and still make some money and save money on my rent. So I thought this was going to be a 1.5-year gig until I completed school. And then I thought I'd probably move overseas or stay in DC and work an international business job. The funny thing about this industry is you get sucked into it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you talk about the humans of multifamily because there are so many amazing people. And it's a really unique situation where we get to deal with somebody's most personal thing in their life, which is their home. And I just loved when I was leasing, I loved connecting with people. Where I worked, my first property was in Arlington, Virginia, so just across the river from Washington, D.C., and it was eclectic. We had people from all over the world that were moving in. And again, it goes back to the exposure that I had when I was studying abroad, is just respecting and understanding and appreciating people of other cultures, learning what their food's like, learning what their culture is like. And I just fell into this industry and really enjoyed it and thought, you know what, I could maybe make a go of this. And I was fortunate that somebody in my life had seen something in me in property management and said, I really think you should take on a training role. There was a training coordinator role. They said, I think you should interview for it. And I did, and I accepted the job. And I think that's where I really got my love for this industry, is training people that work at the properties to understand and appreciate that it's really important what we do. And it's so personal to people, and it makes a huge impact and a huge difference in people's lives if they enjoy where they live. And so got into training and then just started taking on more responsibility. So took on marketing, and then had a chance to take a national role when I was with Lincoln, and took on more responsibility. I've always been the one that likes to raise my hand and say, I'll take it. Like, I'll do the stuff that other people don't want to do, or I'll take the task or the project that nobody else wants to tackle, because I'm always up for the challenge.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, we did we just hired a sales leader, and we did a kind of 5-city roadshow. So we went to 5 different cities, visited all our customers, visited, 10 plus properties. And one of the fun topics of conversation was just crazy stories on site. And you having been in the industry for so long, do you have any crazy stories of just things that were really interesting that happened?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many crazy stories of what can happen. Some that can be disturbing and sad, and some that can be really amazing as well, right? I've seen people that have fallen in love, 2 different residents that have fallen in love and gotten married, through living at the apartment building. I've seen the same in a company that I've worked for. At a leadership conference, 2 employees who met at a volunteer event that we put together, and they fell in love and got married and have a family now together. So you see so many wonderful things. But I do remember when I first started in the business that, those first couple phone calls or those first couple resident complaints that come in, and how naive you can be. And so somebody will call or come in and say, my apartment is infested with roaches, there's mold everywhere, whatever it may be. And you're immediately appalled that that could be happening, because you're picturing in your own home what that would look like. And I remember calling maintenance in a complete panic. We've got to take care of this person. Can you please go to this apartment? And they came back and they said, Jennifer, there was 1 bug in the apartment, right? This was not an emergency. And it was a really quick reminder that you have to trust but verify the information that people are telling you, and to not get too personally tied up in what somebody's saying, or if they feel like they're attacking you in some way. It's not personal, right? It's personal to them because it's their home, but it's not personal when it comes to talking to you about their issues and their problems.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's super fascinating. How have, through the journey of being in multifamily, you've been at a couple different companies. Is there any thread that ties the industry together in terms of or is every company different in the way they run?
Every company is different, but they're all very, very much alike. It's funny, I've talked to friends that when I've made changes or when they've made changes, it's kind of the same stuff, just a different name on the door. We're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to lease apartments, we're trying to maintenance and take care of apartments, and we're trying to collect rent. That's the core to our business.
Yeah.
And sometimes we overcomplicate the business by layering on too much for what the resident actually needs. The resident really wants somewhere that they are proud to call home, that they feel safe in their home, is clean, and it provides them the great location and the amenities that they want.
So I've never lived in a Class A building. Usually the apartments I've lived in are kind of the smaller garden style buildings. What are we seeing as new? I'm just curious, like new amenities that it sounds like people are like really into cold plunges at amenities. Are we seeing properties actually have cold plunges, or is there any unique amenities that you see are really working well?
I think some cold plunges, you're definitely seeing a lot of the co-working space that's been taking off since COVID for quite some time. Pickleball seems to be all the rage, right? And some of those amenities are good because they can be repurposed pretty easily if it falls out of fashion, right? So if people don't want to play pickleball anymore and it goes back to tennis or it goes back to basketball, you can easily repurpose those areas and put them back to what people are going to use. And also thinking about what are some services on demand that people would want, and providing that to them.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. I guess if you think about your career and beyond, who do you feel like has most shaped you in your worldview? Either somebody you know, somebody who you don't know, somebody who's not alive. Who do you feel like has had the most impact on your life?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple different people that I can think about. Certainly my parents, right? They shaped my worldview, my view of how I approach work, and putting in the effort and the energy to be proud of what it is that you're producing, being kind to the people that you work with and you're surrounding yourself with. Because what do they say? The 5 closest people to you are really a reflection of who you are. And so choosing wisely on who you choose to align yourself with and who you work with. And then also the fact of giving back, right? Understanding that it's so important that in this business, we're not just housing residents, we're also providing them opportunity and giving back to the communities where we operate. So certainly my parents. Somebody that I've long admired in the industry and looked up to as a really strong woman is Sue Ansell at Gables, the CEO. She's just, if I can say it, a badass, right? Yeah. Where she goes under the radar from the sense of she never has to promote herself. Her reputation speaks for herself. And she certainly leads through her actions. So what she says is what she does. And she does it with grace. So she's somebody that I've certainly looked up to for a long time.
What books do you read?
I read quite a bit.
You read quite a bit. Okay. Yes. What do you read?
So one thing, and this may not be new to people that have heard me on a podcast before, but I read the Daily Stoic every day, every year. And so it's a passage every day of the year that I read. And, it's funny because some days you'll read the passage this year and it doesn't really resonate today. But maybe 2 years from now, that same passage that I'm reading today is going to be really relevant. And so it's so amazing how you can look back and remember certain things that you're reading and take into account. And then I've read all of Ryan Holiday's books. I'm currently reading his most recent one that's centered around justice. So he looks at the 4 Stoic principles, and he's on his 3rd book that's focused on justice. Always a great read, always really thought-provoking. And makes you re-examine your life and how you react to things.
How did you get into Stoicism?
So somebody gifted me the Daily Stoic, and I started reading it. And probably a few months into it, I was like, this is really tremendous. And, much of it is reminders of what you may already know, but it goes deeper than that. And it makes you think and question yourself on how you react to certain situations, how as people we tend to overreact to things that are happening to us, and focusing on things that we can't control as opposed to really focusing on those things that are coming at us that we can control and make an impact around. Yeah,
one of my favorite quotes, I don't know who said it, is nothing is as good as it seems and nothing is as bad as it seems.
That's right.
Right, so you must have heard the parable where, I'm going to butcher it, but there's a man and a son in a village, and the city, the village is really concerned, and he's like, nothing is as good as it seems, nothing is as bad as it seems. And then another event happens, and then he says the same thing. And ultimately you realize you don't really know what's in your best interest.
Right.
The way we got started in our company was we had a previous business where we were building an Airbnb property management company. And at the time it was doing super well. We had properties in 13 different cities, and we were profitable and everything. And then COVID hit. And completely destroyed the business. And we went from, making tons of money to in 5 days losing $100,000 a month. And at the time in March of 2020, I was like, there could have not been a worse
right.
situation for us to be in than this. And I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, that's what led to us building this business. So I definitely kind of resonate with that, is that you don't really know what's in your best interest. And there's some comfort in that, right?
There is.
Because then you know, it's like life just goes on, and all you have to do is just kind of appreciate that moment and remember that nothing's as good as it seems and nothing's as bad as it seems.
That's right. And that when you look back a year, 2 years, 4 years, you'll actually appreciate that obstacle that you overcame.
Yeah. Totally.
Absolutely.
What else do you read outside of this?
So another woman that I really respect and read everything I can of hers or watch anything of hers is Carla Harris. She's really impactful. She's spoken at a couple industry events through the Crew Convention, and she spoke at the NMHC Women's event. I believe that was most recently this past year. And she's just a really inspirational woman that works on Wall Street. She's an African-American woman who really just broke the ceiling, broke the glass ceiling, and was able to exert herself. And she shares words of wisdom on how to lead, how to gain influence in the environment that you're in. And she calls them pearls of wisdom. She wears pearls quite a bit. And she always talks about her pearls of wisdom. And many of those pearls, just stick with you. And I think about those things often of how you're going to approach leadership, how you're going to approach dealing with your team, and how you're going to approach conflict and overcoming, obstacles.
So for me, I find it incredibly challenging to balance like my personal life and work, right? As most people who are ambitious do. How do you balance like everything outside of work?
Yeah, it's not easy, right?
It's not easy.
But I think, and this is probably a good thing too that goes into other things that I read, but having I have a pretty stringent routine in the morning where I get up, I drink a glass of water, I meditate, I do yoga, and I read a bunch of things, either industry related or just world related in general. And certainly do some emails too to make sure there's nothing that's on fire first thing in the morning. But I do those things, and it's a long drawn out process until I get ready and then get myself into the office. But it allows me to ground, and especially through meditation and yoga, it allows me to kind of level set the day. And maybe I have read something that started to get me wound up. It gets me back in a place where I'm thinking about what can I control, how is my reaction to it, and how can I let it roll off my back.
Do you wake up at the same time every day?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
5 o'clock, and sometimes it's 4:30, but it's normally 5 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah.
Through an alarm now, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I do still need an alarm.
And then do you sleep early enough?
I go to bed at 9 normally.
Okay. So you have I find that morning routines, I'm also very much like that. I feel like it just, when you get that routine out in the day, it just feels like your whole day has like gotten off to a good start.
Absolutely.
And you set it up. So have you cultivated this routine over time?
Yes.
And added new things to it? Yeah.
It's several years, yes. And Daily Stoic I read. So I read the passage from the book, and then I also am on their email. You get a separate passage via email. So I read both of those in the mornings as well.
Yeah.
But it's pretty much stayed the same, I would say now for several years, right?
Yeah.
It works. And I enjoy it, and I kind of look forward to it.
What about on the weekends?
Same routine.
It's the same thing.
Same routine. Yeah.
Wow.
I sleep in a little bit longer.
Okay.
Normally 6:30.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about. Have you? Do you know Andrew Huberman or anything like that?
No.
So he's a professor at Stanford and has this famous podcast called Huberman Lab, and he talks about like the importance of sleep. And
Yes.
I recently got this thing called 8 Sleep. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's like a mattress pad that basically cools. It's like it cools the bed, and it also tracks your sleep. And it's been a massive game changer in my sleep because we were talking about this before recording, but I live in Santa Monica and there's no AC in my apartment. So it's super hot. So it like really cools me down. And it's, I'm finding that like sleep is the one thing. I've kind of been thinking about how to like organize my life. And it's almost like first you need to like empty out everything in your life and then almost reassemble the things that are most important, right? So for me, as I've been thinking about that, it's like, okay, if I were to empty everything out, what is the one thing that like makes everything else better? It's probably sleep, good sleep, right? It's hard to be clear and and in a good state of mind if you don't get good sleep.
Agree.
So I definitely, the challenge though for me is like getting to bed early enough to wake up early enough.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, then you're just like setting yourself up for failure.
It's easier for me at home actually to go to bed on my routine. It's harder when I'm traveling, especially with time difference, to get on that routine.
Yeah.
But it's so important. And I think I didn't fully answer your question around work-life balance, right? It's a challenge, right, for all of us. It's difficult. I think there's certain times or certain weeks or days where work ends up dominating because there's things that have to get done. And then there's times when you can kind of step back and say, all right, I have to take some personal time. I'm a big believer of calendaring things. So putting it on the calendar. And I am pretty regimented with my time. I live and die by my calendar. So if it's on the calendar, I'm going to do it.
That is awesome. Good. I'm not as good as that yet. I'm incorporating that because I kind of realize like you have this whole to-do list where you're like tracking all your things that you need to do. But oftentimes your perception of what you can do far exceeds what you can actually do.
Right.
So if you don't actually see how you can like put it on the calendar, then you're not going to do it. So that's really interesting. So do you schedule out like the task with the time and you do it during that time?
Yes.
So how do you deal with like, I try to do that, but the problem is you get some like, I don't know, some text message or email. Do you like put away all your devices and then focus on that task, or is it?
I don't, depending though on what the task is. Okay. And there's things certainly you're going to move stuff around for, right? Yeah. That you have to. Last week I had stuff that come up where I had things on the calendar that I was going to do budget reviews certain days, and we had an investor come to town. So that changes things. And that's where it goes back to being okay with understanding that your work week is not 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Your work week can extend, and it might be, I was at the office till almost 9 o'clock on Friday night, but that allowed me to get budgets done and reviewed with zero interruptions, right? There was nobody in the office popping in. There was nobody calling, texting, emailing. So truly when I was there in that time, I could get through budget. And then understanding that there's some give and take, right? If I'm there till 9 o'clock on Friday, then if I need to leave and do some things during the week, that's okay.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
And have that flexibility. And you can't allow guilt to, I think for a long time in my career, so for younger people listening, don't allow guilt to get in the way of feeling like you have to be somewhere at some time doing something all the time. I think for those of us that are really diligent in our work, we work way more than 40 hours in a week. And as long as you're getting the job done and being available for the people that need you, you need to be flexible about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely struggle with that where it almost feels like if I'm not working, there's something wrong. And that's one of the reasons where I have to be careful, right? Because sometimes you can trick yourself. Like if you're not working, there's that leisure time. But if you're using it to just feel productive, then you're just like wasting time that you can actually spend like rejuvenating yourself. So I struggle with that too, is for people that are ambitious, like you work a lot, but when you're not working, you feel guilty. Did you suffer from that sort of something similar?
Yes, I think I've gotten a lot better at it as I've gotten older, where now I used to feel guilty if I would just sit at home and read a book or sit at home and watch TV, like watch a sporting event. Now it's like there's times when I just need to do that. I'll say to my husband, I've talked to way too many people this week. I just need to sit at home and do nothing, right? Or one other thing that I really enjoy doing is cooking. And cooking doesn't allow me to really think about business, especially when I'm chopping vegetables or doing something along those lines, where I know there's an easier way to do it and I have a food processor. But if I put it in the food processor, my mind can start to wander and think about work. Where if I'm chopping vegetables, I'm focusing on not cutting my finger, right? And I'm strictly focused on that.
What are some, so it's really interesting, right? Because I'm 7-8 years into my career. And it's a startup. Every year that goes by, I'm essentially playing a different role, right? And for you, over the years, you've also played many roles. Like, what do you feel like you've learned as almost an indisputable or incontrovertible like truth about leadership and like management? Is there anything that like stands out that you're like, damn, like I wish I knew that when I was first starting out in my career?
I think you have to treat people the way that you want to be treated, and one size does not fit all, right? So there's people on your team, and one thing that we utilize at Western Wealth is the DISC profile. And I have a DISC done on myself and everybody that works on my team. So I best know how they relate to other people, right? So if I need to give constructive feedback, how are they going to take it? If things are going really well, how do they want to be recognized, right? Understanding, because I have some people that are very outgoing and love to be praised in public, but that doesn't work for everybody, right? Some people absolutely do not want to be in the spotlight and would much prefer something in private to share, hey, you've done a really nice job with this project and I wanted to let you know that. They don't need everybody to hear that because they may be embarrassed or don't want to be part of the spotlight. So I think to me, it's just understanding and being a chameleon to how people want to be spoken to, how you can get the best out of them instead of just having it be the way that you want things to be done. And understanding that. And I think too, just being willing to roll up your sleeves and do any task, no matter how big or how small, showing your team that you're going to walk the walk that you're expecting of them is really critical.
Totally. I came across a podcast on my LinkedIn feed last week that I thought was really interesting. And it's a podcast by this guy called Lenny, who runs a product management podcast in tech. And he interviewed this guy that basically is well into his career, but instead of choosing to go the management route, he has gone to stay in the IC route.
Yeah.
And apparently there's this new movement, or at least I'm looking at the podcast where, ultimately people value, you do need leaders, of course, but
yes.
Ultimately, at least, in startups, like what is most important is the work gets done. And usually the way the work gets done is by somebody actually doing the thing.
Yes.
So I was super fascinated by that because it talked about like the new term, an IC, but a super IC. So this is like a new role that's really valued in startups and in work. Is people actually just doing the work. Yeah.
More flat organizations of people doing the work. And I think we are seeing that too, where some young people are realizing, I don't want that responsibility of managing people because managing people is one of the most rewarding things you can do in your career, but it's also one of the most difficult because everybody's different, right? And everybody has a different idea of what communication looks like and what support looks like and what their role looks like in an organization. And it's really a balancing act to figure out how to get the best out of everybody that's on your team so they feel supported and they feel in the know.
What most energizes you or de-energizes you about your work?
Yeah, I think energizes me is dealing with people. I'm certainly a people person and love to see people start at one level and, grow and expand to another level. I've been really fortunate to stay involved with a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, and it's amazing to see where they've started and where they've ended up and knowing what potential still, is there for them. And just to know that I had maybe a tiny bit of impact in that is certainly something that energizes me. De-energizes me. I think people that don't want to collaborate, right? And that don't want to be part of a team, people that allow negativity to come into play, right? Work's called work for a reason, right? It's not always fun. It's not always laughter and good times and jokes, but the hard times allow you to appreciate the really good times. And if you're in it with the right team and the people that are there to support you and have your back and encourage you along the way, it makes a world of difference. And when I think back to some of the strongest relationships I have in this industry goes back to coworkers and also industry peers that we've been through a lot together, but we've always supported each other and lifted each other up. Knowing that we're going to help each other whenever we need it.
Do you have any regrets?
No, definitely not. When it comes to my career, because there are things that are difficult and things that are hard, but if you don't ever get challenged, you don't know what you're truly capable of. And most of those challenges that I've come up against have been where I've learned the most and I've grown the most. and have allowed me to take on those next roles, right? So when I joined Western Wealth, it was a whole new thing, right? I was starting a management company from scratch. I'd never done that before. But you have to have the belief in yourself, and you also have to have a really strong network of people that are there to bend over backwards to help you succeed. And that was the biggest thing that I saw throughout that part is there were maybe more times where I had given help and given support in the first 20 years of my career. And then I was able to call on a lot of favors when I was setting up this company. And it was amazing how people would do anything to make that happen in order for me and the company to be a success.
How did you make that leap? It's such a bold leap to like go out and try to start something.
Yeah, it was one of those things when I got called about the position, the investment company was looking to bring management in-house. And so they needed a leader to help them build it. And I got called, and of course you have, that doubt in your mind of, can I do this? I've never done this before. What is that going to look like? But you have to let the fear, you have to put the fear aside and say, but I want to do this. And this is something that is really energizing for me. And I've shown success in other things that I've done in the past. Why can't I do this? And if I don't know the answers, which there are so many times I was out of my comfort zone, but I know a lot of people that are going to know the answers, and they're going to be willing to give the feedback and give the help and encouragement. And so to me, it was, I didn't want the other way when you asked, what would I regret if I didn't take that job? If it was, offered to me and I turned it down, I didn't want 5 years from now to look back and say, man, I should have done that. That was an opportunity that I probably wouldn't have again. And I just didn't want to have regret.
Have you heard of the regret minimization framework?
No.
It's so Jeff Bezos, like when he was deciding to start Amazon, used this frame. It's basically what you said is one of the best ways to make decisions. And I take a lot of inspiration from Warren Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger.
Yes.
And one of the things Charlie Munger always talks about is inversion. So always invert. So when you need to make a decision, always think about what would the opposite be. So if you want something to go well, ask yourself what will make it not go well. Mm-hmm. And usually you get a lot of clarity there. So even with Jeff Bezos, it was, at the end of my life, there's always going to be some regret, right? Because there's so many choices that we all can make that it's almost impossible, in my opinion, to not have some micro regrets. So the question is like, how can you minimize the regret through your life? So it's a really interesting framework when you think about it.
Absolutely. And I think too, the funny thing is I loved the Ted Lasso series. And when people ask me about failures or things that went wrong or regrets, I kind of live by that philosophy of the goldfish, right? It's the 10-second rule of, I try not to dwell too much on what went wrong.
Yeah.
Certainly when something happens, right, you've got to debrief, you've got to figure it out, you have to correct it. But to me, it has to be a learning tool. So if something went wrong, let's learn from it and let's not let it happen again. But then you have to let it go, right? You can't linger on it and 6 months down the road still beat yourself up about something that happened because that's not going to allow you to move forward.
Are you good at not doing that?
I am.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Have you gotten better over time?
Yes. It takes work, right? Yeah. It takes discipline and it takes practice. And it takes talking to yourself, right? Of encouraging yourself. Don't beat yourself up over that, right? Nobody else around you is being as hard on you as you are being. So why are you doing that? And then allowing it to roll. And that's where I think, journaling or meditation or something allows you to detach from it and understand that, like you said, it's not as bad or it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. And so you have to move on.
What's your meditation practice like?
So every morning I do a minimum of 10 minutes, and they're guided meditations that I listen to, different channels. And then in the evening, I normally do about 30 minutes before I go to bed.
Wow.
And it really sets the tone for sleep. It also allows, I have it going in the background so you don't have the screen time, which is impacting your sleep. And quite frankly, I sometimes fall asleep during it. But I take that as a win, right? Because it means I am relaxed and ready to welcome in sleep, which is a good thing.
So you're like an incredibly disciplined person.
I am, yeah.
You are. Where do you think that came from?
I think growing up, right? So I had chores growing up, and there were expectations of my family, and my parents were both very organized, focused on their work. But then when they got home, one thing that my parents really focused on was our yard. We had this beautiful yard growing up, and my dad was trained as a landscape architect in college. And so it was certainly his passion. He, in his career, ended up getting away from that. But his side hustle, I guess it wasn't even a hustle, it was our house. But his hobby was to make our yard beautiful. And there was a lot of discipline with that, right? When you've got flowers and plants from all seasons and taking care of all of that, there was always something on the weekends that my dad was out doing, and then including my brother and I with our chores and things that we needed to do. So I think it's just the structure and the work ethic, and my parents spent time, explaining to us the importance of money and how to manage your money and never extending yourself or never living beyond your means, which was really critical. And I think it's a big miss in our schools is not teaching children that. We're expecting that parents will do that.
100%.
And it doesn't happen for the most part.
100%. It's honestly shocking to me that it's not part of curriculums.
And I think, I loved math growing up, and this was back when checks were big, but I loved balancing my checkbook and, making sure everything matched to the penny and just being responsible for my money. And I was very fortunate that my parents definitely gave me discipline as it related to finances, but they gave me a leg up and paid for my undergraduate degree. So I certainly didn't have to take a loan out, which gave me a leg up. They paid for me to study abroad, and they did pay for me to study abroad when I went in graduate school. I did pay for my own credits, but they paid for me to study abroad. And so that certainly was a huge help. But I didn't take that for granted, where some kids could have seen that as, ooh, I'm going to rack up credit card debt because I didn't have to pay for these things. I certainly didn't.
You didn't? Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned, growing up, you had a bunch of chores. Do you feel like one thing that I'm always so curious about is I love to look at people that have been successful and understand where that came from, right? Because usually they're root characteristics that make people successful. Discipline is definitely one of them. Do you feel like, so it sounds like you learned by doing, do you feel like you also learned by observing your parents be disciplined, seeing your dad do the work, seeing your mom do the work?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
That it was every day. I'm sure there were days they didn't feel well or didn't want to do things, but they had the discipline to keep going, right? And to understand that they were impacting what my brother and I would see as important, and that it would influence us as well.
Is your brother disciplined?
He is, very much so. Yeah.
Wow. And that's really interesting. Do you feel different than your family in any way, or are you guys all very similar? So
my brother and I are quite different, actually. So we get along really well, but we're introverted and quiet, whereas I'm always the outgoing one of the group. But I would say to our core of what we believe in and how we live our lives would be very similar.
So outside of discipline, we talked a little bit about what you learned from your parents. What would you say is like the second biggest thing?
I think too, communication. So I briefly mentioned something that I think is really important is sitting down and talking about your day, and having dinner together. It's something that I really cherish, and my husband and I do it every day that we're home, right? We sit down, we talk about the day. He normally asks me, what's something good that happened today, right? Because even if you've had an absolutely horrible day, there was always something good that happened. And I try and front load that with, I did yoga this morning and it was an amazing practice, or I did a meditation and it was great. So you front load the day knowing that you've already accomplished something great. And so regardless of what happens the rest of the day, you've had something good that came about. But I think just communication, right? And talking to people, letting people know where they stand, and what's happening so they feel involved in the process is crucial. And, there's times when there's negativity going around with things going on in our world and the economy, and people get into a tailspin when they don't know the why of what's happening or what is happening. So it's really important as leaders to communicate, and even when you think you're maybe over communicating, to continue to go for it.
One more question on the discipline thing, because I just find that very fascinating. Do you feel like people ask me this as well, and I don't know if I have a great answer, but do you feel like being overtly disciplined or structured hinders or prevents spontaneity?
It can sometimes, sure. Where you can be so regimented that it can be difficult to sometimes change. But I think you have to realize and understand that in yourself, and also have people around you that are willing to tell you that.
Yeah. How do you feel when you fall out of your routine?
Not good, I would say.
Yeah.
Like with my morning routine, I definitely don't feel good. I feel off sorts when I don't have my routine in that perspective. I know at work, honestly, that what I lay out and what I think is going to happen that day is not necessarily going to happen. And I'm okay with that. But I always tell my team and my team's team that you have to manage the day. You can't let the day manage you. And I live and die, like I said, by a calendar. So I have a digital calendar, but I also still go old school and have a paper calendar of tasks that I write down, or things or projects that have to get completed. And it's like do or die on Monday. These 3 things have to get done. And if that means I have to work until 10 o'clock at night to get that to happen, it needs to happen. And so I try and tackle those things at the beginning of the day so it doesn't get to be 7, 8 o'clock and I'm still trying to get through those tasks.
When do you plan the Monday thing? Do you plan it the previous week?
Friday.
On Friday.
Yes, so
you
Friday
write down
afternoons.
the 3 things. This is what you write down on the paper.
Correct.
The 3 things. Do you only do it for Monday, or do you do it for every day?
I do it for the whole week. So the Friday afternoon prior, I write out my calendar. So I look at my digital calendar and then I put it on my paper calendar. And then I also add all of my tasks on there as well.
For Monday through Friday.
Monday through Sunday. Yeah. So even
Monday
through my
through
personal
Sunday.
tasks too, things that I need to accomplish.
How do you build in like last minute requests or urgent requests into that?
Oh, there's plenty of time to do that.
Okay, there's plenty of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that I'm trying to get better at is there's this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Yes.
You read it or heard of
Yes.
it? Okay. Cool. And there's also this term of like swallowing the frog,
Yes.
right? Where you're trying to get the hardest thing done.
Yes.
And so I was just chatting with one of my friends this morning actually on like how do I build in or bake in that 90-minute, because I think what people often forget is like ultimately getting things done is a function of like intense focus times like time spent, right?
Yes.
And if there's like a lack of focus and there's a lot of time spent, it doesn't necessarily mean you're like getting more done than if you were like intensely focused in a short period of time. And I feel like if I were to, and if most people were to block out 90 minutes every morning to work on the most important things, like you said, and define those things ahead of time and execute on those things, like you would just physically feel like you or your company or your career's in a totally different place.
Yes.
Because if you compound that small benefit every day for weeks or years, it makes a huge difference for sure.
It does. And I think too, to that point, there was a day last week where I had some work stuff that I knew I needed quiet time to do. And if I went into the office, it was going to take me 3 or 4 hours to get done what I could do in an hour and a half in my home office.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do yoga that morning. I opened up my computer and did that work then during the time that I normally would have done yoga. And I remember coming out and my husband said, "No yoga this morning?" And I said, "It'll be tonight. I'm going to prioritize that tonight because I had to get this work done before the day got away from me." And so it's also being flexible enough to understand that, yes, that is important to me. Yoga is important to me, but I'm going to prioritize it in the evening.
Yeah. That's super inspiring because I just find it so challenging to be that disciplined with the most important thing. So it's super inspiring that you're able to keep up the consistency there. How do you think you built like? Is it just been you've been doing that for so long that you feel like you built up that habit?
Exactly, right? They say 21 days to make a habit, and so I'm well beyond that. Where it's just something that I look forward to now. But I also don't beat myself up if there is a day, right? If I have a 6 a.m. flight, I'm not getting yoga in before I hop on the plane.
Yeah.
And you can't beat yourself up about that, right?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You'll come up with something else. I'm walking at the airport. I'm getting steps in. I'm doing something else that's going to allow me to be mindful. And you just can't beat yourself up over some of the things that you can't control or you can't do.
And one thing that you brought up earlier that I found interesting was, you maybe work doesn't end from like Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. I personally very much believe that, because there could be a Tuesday at 2 p.m. where my energy is just so low, or I just don't feel productive. Mm-hmm. And I could work on other tasks, but there are Saturdays where I'm feeling super great and I just want to go to a coffee shop and sit down and put on my headphones and get things done. And I often find that rather than adhering to a fixed structure, I kind of adhere to an energy structure of where am I most productive? One thing you talked about being super disciplined with your calendar. Another thing that's been really helpful for me is doing an energy audit too, of looking at your calendar on Friday and reflecting what periods of time, and literally marking the event, orange, green, or red or whatever, to indicate when you feel most productive. And then you can start building a mental model of okay, my mornings are super crisp, and that's when I should be stacking up all the hardest tasks. And the periods of time where I'm feeling less energized, I should be doing super low level tasks.
Exactly. Not looking at budgets and reviewing financials when you're in that zone.
Yeah, exactly.
But to me, when I find that my energy is dropping, that's a great time for me to walk around the office and talk to people, right? Check in with people and see how they're doing. And sometimes their energy then can impact you in a positive way as well.
Yeah.
Right.
That's another thing that I've recently built into my life that's been so helpful, is just walking and talking. I feel why do I need to sit at it? I mean, there's some meetings where it's you're sharing a screen or whatever, but oftentimes I find that when I'm walking and talking and thinking, I'm so much more clear in my understanding of the problem or my ability to solve the problem, rather than just sitting, because I bet there's a bunch of research and studies on this, but I just find that productivity and creativity goes through the roof, and I feel it's underutilized.
Absolutely.
Well, Jennifer, thank you. This has been really fun, and I definitely didn't know as much as I do about you right now. And it's super inspiring to just see and hear your story and how you've incorporated kind of these rituals to help you execute. I think it makes a lot of sense that you're into the Stoicism and Ryan Holiday and all of that stuff. And it's incredible to hear the story firsthand. And I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.